Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Beyond Compliance. My name is Aaron Bolshaw. I'm here with Safety Chain. And today we're really putting the beyond in Beyond Compliance. I think most of us think that, we think about the regulatory and some customer compliance aspects of our process manufacturing facilities, but we're diving in straight to the supplier side. So we're going to learn 5 steps to ensure better quality from your suppliers, and it really does have to do with some key things we're going to go through. I will give everyone a quick heads up. We're going to show some software screens today. It is not our intention to sell you software. All we want to do is show you how it can look. You will get some solid steps that you can take with you back in your facilities today and run things a little bit better. So anybody not sure who we are yet, Beyond Compliance is a periodic industry update for process manufacturers. The goal, very simple: bring you insights from around the market that shape the way you grow your business, deliver quality products to your customers, and safeguard your brands. And you got to do this obviously while improving yields and maximizing productivity. So Safety Chain is the sponsor of this series, which is the #1 plant management platform trusted by over 1,500 manufacturing facilities to improve yields, maximize productivity, and ensure compliance. So we're scheduled for about an hour today. We got a ton of great information to cover with some very compelling stories for us as well. But first, I want to make sure everyone understands you're on mute. We cannot hear you. You can only hear us, but that doesn't mean we don't want to hear from you. So please use the webinar console to submit questions to the presentation, and we'll save some time at the end to get to as many as we can. And yeah, if you'd like to get the slides and the recordings from today, you just ask us, we'll get that over to you. I know that some people maybe want to share this with some colleagues, either there in your business or elsewhere. So we'll make sure that you have what you need to do that. So with that, just want to introduce our speakers today. Kevin Lee is a solutions architect at Safety Chain here. Over 30 years of manufacturing, distribution, and supply chain experience. This guy is awesome to be around. I still learn a ton from him. And he's got over 10 of those years specifically in the quality risk and compliance arenas with companies that are regulated by the FDA. So, but he does specialize in manufacturing and supplier quality management. Then we got Brandon Wright, also a solutions architect here, 25 years experience as a manufacturing operations expert. He's in his roles have been COO, plant superintendent, director of operations, ops management, production manager, and coach. He owned a flour mill, ran and owned a flour mill. So he's got the top to bottom experience really applied to process manufacturing and with formal certifications and training in theory of constraints, Lean, Six Sigma. So again, very, very much more smarter than me. Kevin and Brandon, welcome.
Thank you very much, Aaron. We really appreciate the opportunity to present to everyone today.
Thank you. We're excited to be here.
Yeah, cool. Well, listen, I wanted to start us off today a little bit different. Instead of just jumping in and saying, hey, here's what we're going to show you and the agenda and stuff like this, I wanted to take everyone's temperature. So I'm going to launch a poll right now, and this is intended to give everyone an understanding of how many suppliers that we all manage. I'm going to launch this poll in a second. You're going to see it come up on your screens. I'm going to ask everyone to take about a minute to answer this. It really does. It'll help us kind of set the stage to see and understand, hey, with all of we've had, I think, a few hundred people register for this, just to give us kind of an idea of where everyone's at. And I can see that 53, 56, 58% people voted. So just take a couple more seconds, because Brandon, Kevin, managing 10 suppliers, much different than if you're in 100, 250, something like that, right? I mean, there's no doubt about it. It's a different animal.
Totally different animal, managing 5 to 10 versus managing even greater than 50. Because when you break down those suppliers, you may have domestic suppliers, you may have international suppliers, you may have, it could be from any part of the world. So the larger you have, the more numbers, it seems like the higher sophistication and complexity that's involved.
Yeah, Exactly. Well, I'm going to share these results. I'm going to see what where everyone's at. So pretty good, actually. So a good mix. We've got some folks here that are managing 1 to 25. Really, that sweet spot though, 26 to 500. A few people over 500. This is great. I just want to make sure everyone sort of knew. You know, you don't see each other. Obviously, this is virtual, but you can kind of see who's sitting around you in this virtual room now. And so with that, this helps us to kind of get a little bit more crafty with our presentation as we get into it. So many thanks to everyone for voting. With that, I'd like to turn it over to the experts here and let you guys really kick off what we're going to be going through today with one quick caveat note. If you got to run, take a screenshot of this thing right here. Bye. No, stick around for the whole thing. We've got really good stories to tell kind of behind. There's more to it than this, isn't it, Kevin and Brandon?
Wow, looking at these polls, these results is amazing, man. We have a few at 13% with 500. So thank you, Aaron, for kicking us off, and we're really excited to present to you. And what Brandon and I are going to do in a dialogue sort of way is we just want to talk about these topics and explore them. We want to talk about how you can extend your supplier network visibility. Some of you voted with 500 suppliers. Imagine trying, how do you see those suppliers? What's the pain involved in analyzing and keeping track of your requirements, your certificates, your audits with all those suppliers? And then we're going to move into rating and scoring your suppliers. How do you rank your suppliers? What's the criteria that you use to rank your suppliers? How do you manage the risks of your suppliers? And think about it from step number 2 to step number 3 before we get to step 4. In order to manage the risks, how do you communicate with your supplier? So we're going to dive deep into some of these topics of rating your supplier, automating your schedule, your communication with your supplier, and then, of course, your risks. How do we manage those suppliers who have challenges and maybe they send us the wrong product systematically? And how do we correct those conditions? How do we create those supplier CAPAs to better improve their relationship with the suppliers so they can match and exceed our expectations? So this is a high level overview of the 5 steps that Brandon and I are going to dive deep into in this conversation. All right, so let's go back here. Brandon, think of it like this. When you look at the suppliers on the first step, I always say the pain that companies go through is it easy in a comprehensive view to see your suppliers? Brandon and I speak with customers all the time, prospects, and the biggest challenge is the pain that they receive is not able to see their suppliers. How do I know how many suppliers I have in California versus in the United States versus Canada versus Europe? So some of you may have international suppliers, but the challenge is, how do I see what's going on with those suppliers? How do I see when their requirements are due? Their audits, maybe they have to send me a particular certificate. They're up for their annual or biannual audits. How do you determine how many requirements you have per your supplier? Maybe your ingredients or raw material supplier, can you determine which ones are your ingredient suppliers versus your sanitation providers, your suppliers who provide you a service versus the ones who provide you materials? So the next one is, do you require emails and spreadsheets? I put that there because we find a lot of customers, large customers and small customers, are still tracking, managing their suppliers with emails and spreadsheets. So when you look at your visibility, these are painful elements that we find within the industry today. And Brandon, if you can, let's see your perspective on this, Brandon.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. So being able to see all these folks that are giving you products, right, or materials or whatever it is that's going into your process, one, we have to treat them like they're an extension of us, because they really are, right? If if they fail and we don't capture that or stop it from getting into our product, and everybody knows this, our brand is going to be tarnished. So it's so important that we treat them like the partners that they are, that we treat them like the extension of our business that they are, and that we manage that as best we can. And I would imagine that a lot of us on the call are in the middle of this supply chain as well, right? We're probably suppliers to other people. We're selling either to other businesses or to storefronts that are selling, or maybe direct to consumer. But we're also seen in this world, right? We probably have experience with our customers auditing us. So one of the big first steps, I think, is extending that network visibility and being able to see everybody. And the ways that I would suggest that we do that are, one, through audits, right? And that's been weird with COVID. One way is to, we get on a plane and go visit their facility, and we have a checklist, and we're going through that to make sure they're meeting our criteria and they're performing, and they're doing what they say they're doing with the products they're supplying us. Another way to do that is with certifications from those credible third parties, right? We've all heard about ISO, we've got SQF and all these auditing bodies, and in those groups that are outside of the food industry, right? If you got welding happening and you've got inspectors coming in and checking things. So and those standards, right, that people are holding themselves to. It's nice to know that they're registered and that they're certified, and they can provide evidence, right? There's that piece of paper on the wall that everybody walks by a million times a day, but that really is a stamp of approval. I think it's important that we build receiving gates in our process to make sure that we're still seeing how they're performing, right? And that those gates are there to prevent bad product from getting in, but they're also capturing information as that product is passing through, right? And helping us see how those suppliers are performing. I also think that shared visibility and integration is a big deal, because as we get more and more wide in this reach, right, and we start to go farther and farther away from our local supplier networks, it's so important to be able to, in an instant, be able to see how they're doing. Do they have their certifications? Can I see that? And then on the other side of that, can they see how they're doing, right? If I'm scoring someone poorly, or they're not performing well to what my standards are, they should know that, and they should be taking action to fix that. And if we're transparent on both sides, and we have mechanisms to allow people to see those things, and we're integrated, I think it speeds that process up quite a bit. And then lastly, vendor performance tracking. And that speaks a bit to all the points above, but what we have to do is start to capture this information and then assess it and analyze it. And that's where things start to get to be a bit of a heavy lift, right? I mean, those folks that have 500 suppliers, you probably got a good amount of people on your teams trying to get this information and do these things on these bullets. And I would imagine the folks on the fewer spectrum side, right? Those folks that are managing 0 to 25, well, obviously more than 0, but 25 vendors, they probably got one person trying to do all this by themselves. So the bigger that this program gets, the more work that it's going to take to really maintain control of this critical component of our business. So
No, that's good. Brandon, have you ever heard of that saying, you can't improve what you can't measure?
yeah, you can't if you can't see it, right? And
Yeah,
there's the Hawthorne effect, right? I mean, we see this with our kids too. If my kids know I'm paying attention, they're usually pretty good to each other. But the moment I look away and start to make dinner or do whatever, all of a sudden World War III is happening, and they're trying to kill each other. So
no, I agree. It's like you can't improve what you don't measure, but you can't measure what you can't see.
yeah,
So I want to show you here is an example of just an example of a way that you can organize your particular suppliers into a view where you can see your suppliers, the status, the ingredients. You can also see them from a comprehensive dashboard that allows you to see how many supplier requirements you have, how many of those supplier requirements are expired, which ones are late, and which ones are pending. And it's just a snapshot of a way to view all of your suppliers in one particular display.
yeah. What's tough is that filing cabinets won't do that for you, right? I mean, We have our receiving slips that come in and somebody's signing that they inspected this receiving ingredient or product. Yep, everything looks great. Gets stamped to a work order or a PO or whatever, goes to finance, they cut a check. And as long as there's not a problem, like a big problem, that thing goes and dies in a filing cabinet. We don't know.
Exactly. And the way I look at it is, let's assume, Brandon, you could see your suppliers. How do you know whether your partner, your suppliers are good or bad? And I apologize. I asked my neighbor about a week ago. I said, please don't cut your grass during the middle of the day. I work from home. He starts cutting his grass during the middle of the day. Do you have neighbors like that? If I bought something from him, but either way, I digress. How do you know if your suppliers are good partners? For example, maybe I have a supplier who responds to my business requirements in a timely way, meaning they they send me the certificate when I ask for it on the first of the month. They send me my NDA on the 15th. They do that on the 15th. But that supplier does not send me the right materials. I order 100, they send me 95. I order 100, they send me 115. I ordered it on the 15th, they send it on the 10th. I ordered on the 15th, they sent it on the 20th. So business-wise, that supplier may be good, but actual performance of sending me what I asked for, they're dismal. So how many ways can you score the supplier? Do I score them on business? Do I score them on requirements? Do I score them on their specifications? Do they exceed it or fail my specifications? Do do we have a formal criteria to rate your suppliers? So these are some challenges that a lot of organizations go through. It says, okay, I could see them, but how do I define, how do I create this particular process so I can start to score, rank, and measure and compare and contrast my suppliers? That's a challenge that we find when we're trying, once we have the ability to see that. And so, Brandon, from your experience, what would you say about that?
You know, if we go back to that previous step and we say we really want to extend this visibility, we want to see what's happening. That's great, but if we don't use that information in a way to help us focus, it's just more information, right? It might as well be going in a filing cabinet. So I think it's important to do exactly that, right? To rate and to score, to build these scorecards for the suppliers, mostly so that we know where to spend our time and attention. So I think one of the big steps in that is building an approved supplier program. And that takes a lot of thought and a lot of planning, right? And action, maybe before you've even made a purchase, but or maybe it's you've made a bunch of purchases and you're starting to get burned and you're like, I can no longer, control this. It's getting bigger than just my arms can handle. I need more there. So I think that starts with defining your criteria for approving and maintaining that approved status. What does good look like for these suppliers? What do they need to continually do? I've had suppliers that do that, right? Especially in the beginning, everybody's great when you're dating, right? And then you get married and you start to relax. And I know that I put on a little extra weight and I started relaxing a bit, right? So it's important to make sure that our suppliers don't just have this honeymoon phase, right? And that they maintain that approved status. And again, that goes back to having visibility and seeing what they're doing and how they're performing. So I think, again, if we've defined that criteria and we say, okay, this is what good looks like, this is what you need to do continually to make sure that you maintain that approved status. I think it's important to communicate those expectations and criteria to the suppliers. Let's put it out there. Let's not make this a secret so that, come tax time, we're not sure if we have to pay or not. Outline that scoring criteria and the methods that you're going to score them by and how you're going to do that. Look, supplier XYZ, this is what we expect from an approved supplier. Not only do you need to fulfill the purchase order contract and agreement, but we expect you not to ship early. We expect you not to overfill orders and ship 5 extra and that we have to either accept it or send it back and now everybody's losing money. And right, we expect you guys to keep your audits up to date and to, whatever that criteria is and how you're going to score it. So I think one of the really good ways, and we'll get to this in later slides about automating this process, but I think it's critical that we build this criteria into our purchase orders and into those individual contracts, because that's really what a PO is. It's a contract, an agreement. And if they're accepting that PO, they're accepting that contract. And if you have your delivery by date and your order quantity and whatever other criteria, it has to come with a C of A, it needs to come with a CSE, or whatever CMTRs, whatever world you're in, make that very explicit on that purchase order. One, that helps when you receive it. You got this person down at the receiving dock who has no idea what the contract is. They just know that they have a PO that arrived, FedEx just dropped it off, and they've got to inspect it and receive it in because the line's waiting to run, right? So that's why I think it's also important to build these things into your SOPs, your standard operating procedures as well, right? When you get a delivery, right? Those work instructions says when you get a delivery, you have to have a PO number, you have to have the PO instructions, you have to verify quantities against the PO, and whatever the delivery criteria is. But there may be other things too, right? Your PO isn't going to have what the specs are for the weight or the grams of each bag or whatever. So you're probably going to have a sampling plan. You're probably going to have some other things that are qualifying the level of performance of that product at delivery and receipt. If you can build that into your SOPs and how they collect that information. When you get a receipt, right? When this thing comes in the door, you need to use this form or this, you use your computer screen and you are logging this information into this tracking mechanism. That way, on the back end of all of this, sure, your accounts receivable and payable know that they have to cut a check and that we receive these things and it's got to go into inventory, and we've got to, all the cost accountants get excited and they've got all the information they need. But you're also able to keep tabs on how all these suppliers are performing, not just on the financial side or the delivery and inventory side, but in trying to qualify the level of that product.
Oh, that's really good. It's you know what, when you think about it like this, from rating and scoring your suppliers, think of it. This is like be a time for Aaron to ask a question. Aaron?
Yeah. Well, exactly. Again, just kind of in that same vein that Brandon was talking about, and we're kind of going through. Just going to poll the audience one more time. I'm going to see. It is curious how many of us have an approved supplier program. So I'm going to launch that poll. This is a real simple one, yes or no, guys. Right. So hopefully everyone can see that on your screens right now. And it's funny how, Brady, you said that honeymoon period, right? Like there's going to be tip top, perfect shape, going to run it like a charm. But then what happens is some subjectiveness starts to seep into the checks, into that thing, right? Because you build a relationship. Speaking of a new supplier, right? You build a relationship, and now you've got, Joe on the other side of this that's sending you some materials, and well, Joe maybe sent you some tickets to the ball game, or this stuff happens and it's okay. You want to build a good relationship foundation with that supplier. That's going to help tremendously. But then, you start to think, well, is that can I accept 95 instead of 100? Yeah, maybe, right? So this is interesting because you have to. It's yes or no. It's questions about, do you have? Is this going on? Is this going on? Is this going on? And you can approve that supplier program. So I'm going to close this and let's see what the results look like. So this is great, right? So most of us have an approved supplier program, and that's fantastic. Some of you that may not, this really does pertain to you. So take some of these back to work with you, start whittling away at these things. Building an approved supplier program is a huge, important first step. For those of you that are out there, you've got an approved supplier program. Some of you are saying, of course we do, right? Now the step is like, how do you manage that, right? So any thoughts on the poll results here, Brandon?
Yeah, I'm sitting here thinking that example you gave, there are so many times in my life where, you've got production lines, you've got these huge machines spun up to create product, and you're waiting for an ingredient to come in, right? The lines are scheduled to go because you're expecting this delivery. So not only is that human aspect coming into play, right? Like these guys always come through. I really love the supplier. They always turn my quotes around quick. They're always giving me, like what I need if I need better pricing, right? They really work with me. And when they slip up, I want to help them. But there's operational pressure on the other side to say, hey, supplier XYZ is out of sugar. Like, we are out of sugar. We've got to run. What are we going to do? And the guy's like, hey, supplier ABC, I just got a quote from them. They've got some. We could go get it right now. And the everybody on the backside is like, well, they're not in our system as approved supplier. If we don't fill these orders, we've got a big deal. I'm guilty of this myself, right? With the flour mill,
Yeah.
we had just signed our biggest new customer, and it was so exciting. And we had an organic product, and we had some other certifications that kind of helped us stand out in our market. And to get one of those certifications, we had to buy product from specific locations, right? We couldn't just go source it from anywhere. So this was an organic rye, and we, sure enough, there was a weird crop issue, and all of a sudden the places that we could buy organic rye, I couldn't get it. We literally could not buy it. I could buy it from across the border, but that meant that I wasn't compliant with the program that I had designated. So here I was like, I can fill this order, and then like, we could go through it, but now we're not complying with our certificate. Now we're not, but nobody's gonna know. Like, it's tough, and we were small business, so it wasn't like I had this big corporate oversight saying, are you following the rules, Mr. Wright? Like, did you comply? It was whether I wanted to comply or not. And we did. We said, look, we have this, for us to comply, we can't. I had to go back to my customer, this new big customer, and say, here's the situation. If we want to go around this, I've got to create a new product. I've got to get new labeling. Like, for me to be able to do this for you the way you want it, I'm going to have to change my process. And we came to agreements that made things work, but there was a lot of pressure, right? I mean, for me, there was money sitting on the table waiting for me to pick it up, and I couldn't do it because the programs we defined limited that.
Yeah, good example. Thanks, Brandon. Yeah, and it could just be as simple as, hey, something's showing up a little bit late. Are you going to have to rework your schedule for the day? Like, oh, we're going to move our afternoon schedule production into the morning and try and and now you've got everybody scrambling around because you don't have that ingredient. So it's really important, get those figured out, get those on paper, and don't use objective measures to qualify and quantify these things. So.
Yeah, that's true.
No, that's great. And Brandon, I really like the image you put here with the scorecard of the supplier. So how do you have those difficult conversations with your supplier? And Aaron just mentioned it. How do you make them objective so that you do that when you have that conversation? Sometimes that difficult conversation with your supplier who believes that they're doing things really well.
Yeah, it's tough, right? I mean, this image evoked so many emotions for me as a human, right? Because I'm sure some of us have had things that we haven't done great on, right? Like, I didn't put in the effort, I didn't put in the time, and I got a bad grade on something that was important. And as a kid, you learn those lessons, and hopefully our folks help us figure out that, we kind of get what we put into it. With a supplier, you may not know, right? Until it's too late. All of a sudden you're having a product recall and you're forced to have that conversation. So hopefully we have processes and systems built in to where we can have this open dialogue, and we can start to identify risk and challenges before they are problems, right? Hey, I see that we're seeing, if I'm having a conversation with a supplier and there's a specific spec that I have, right, for whether it's bricks, right, it needs to be this sweet, or whatever it is. If I can see the information and I can see that we're starting to drift into a bad place, we're not there yet, but I can see it. It's so much easier to have that conversation early and to say, hey, supplier XYZ that I keep picking on, I've noticed that we're trending into a bad place. Are you guys aware of this? Are you guys doing anything to fix this? Help me understand where we're headed. I want to make sure we head this off at the pass. It's so important to have that visibility. So, and I think you like with your kids with that bad report card, sometimes you have to have a tough conversation. And I think if you focus on making it about the performance of the situation, and it's not about them failing or being bad or this or that. I mean, unless they're a terrible supplier, but it should be pretty straightforward, right? Especially if you've got data to fall back on. If you're like, I really feel like you're a bad supplier, and they're like, well, why do you feel like that? If you're able to say, you guys are really struggling with delivering on time, you're at 65% on time delivery, you're over and under filling, 30% of our orders, and we're seeing a trend in the quality based on this subjective criteria. That conversation is so much easier because they can't be like, well, I don't feel like I'm a bad supplier. That they kind of have to own up to it. And then you can start assigning actions like, hey, what are you guys going to do to start delivering on time? What are you going to start to, and you can see if they do it or not. If you don't have that visibility and you don't have the information, it will be a feeling.
No, I agree. That's a good one. Thanks for that, Brandon. Now, what I want to do is just once again, just show an example, because when I looked at certain customers, they would have a yellow light, green light, red light sort of scenario. So you can see the visibility of your suppliers. And this is just an example. You can see your suppliers on one side, and then you could see their particular scoring. Here, when I see red, that tells me the supplier's often late with their material. They send me the wrong material. They short ship me, or they don't do what they're supposed to do. Sometimes sending me more material is just as bad as not sending me enough, because now I have to figure out where I'm going to store it in the warehouse. So
Or
with
you
this
gotta
is,
update your PO.
yeah, or now I got to pay for more, or is it going to be free? And there's a whole bunch of other, it's a ripple effect that occurs when the supplier doesn't satisfy the order specifically. So I just wanted to give an example to everyone on the call, on the webinar, just a sample scorecard. Like I said, some companies will use colors to rank and rate their suppliers. Just so, once again, under the theme of visibility, I could see my suppliers. Now I'm going to rate and score my suppliers. That'll help me move into the next theme, which is, how do I communicate with those suppliers? For example, Brandon just showed an example of a supplier who received a low score, a C score. That was a A, B, C, or D. I showed yellow, green, and red as the scoring. But now that we have that, how do we communicate? How do we interact with our suppliers? Do we only speak with them when there's a problem? Do I have a plan? Some customers will have with their suppliers quarterly meetings with their top suppliers. So every quarter, every 6 months, every year, we meet with those suppliers, not just on an audit perspective, but on a way to say, how do we communicate and make sure we can address certain problems immediately if we have them, and how do we just make our partnership, because you and your suppliers are partners, how do I make that partnership better? So
Yeah.
having a plan and collecting and analyzing, we could develop, you develop a system, because remember, the goal is to eliminate the pain. You do not want to have problems. And by reducing problems is by setting up better visibility, setting up an objective scorecarding, as Aaron mentioned, and also that comes with communication. Transparency adds efficiency, because we know, they know when they ship us the wrong material. We know and they know when they ship something late. So how do we keep that communication going? And how did you do it, Brandon, in your prior experience?
So, there's so much to unpack there, right? It's easy to build an army to manage this. I mean, if you think about how many people your company employs to make your product, if you have, I mean, I'm imagining these folks that have 500 suppliers, I would bet that all those suppliers don't just supply one thing to their business. So let's say on average they're supplying 10 things. So they're getting 5,000 components from these 500 suppliers, right? I mean, it's this huge spread and reach. The magnitude of information and risk that's there is, I mean, there's a lot, right? And it's easy to grow a kingdom to help manage that and to keep it in line, just for information, right? Just to get the data, just to do receiving, just to do POs, and just to do like contract assessment, and now we're getting bigger purchases, and now we have bigger contracts. Like, it just starts to expand and expand, and then throw the FDA into the mix, right? And now we want to increase our traceability requirements, and it's going to have more and more reach, and now we need more people to manage this. Like, it gets to be such a big thing. We've got to, again, having that plan and being strategic about how you're going to manage and grow, one, your visibility, two, your control, and three, your team to handle that, right? I think it's really important to be conscious about how you're gonna do this, rather than just experiencing it. Because if you're growing, you are going to experience something, right? You're going to have to hire more people. You're going to have to. So I think if you're able to say, look, when we get to this point, right, we're in those groups that have 10 to 20, 25 or 50 suppliers. We're able to keep a handle on it, but we are growing. We do need to get some more suppliers because, especially with COVID these days, right? Supply chains dried up. We had these weird ripples from the pandemic, and we just couldn't get ingredients. We couldn't get components. We had to expand our network.
Right.
So as that's forced upon us, we have to, being ready for it and having triggers to say, hey, my folks are putting in a lot of overtime. My purchasing agents are spending an extra 5 hours a week just to get RFPs, just to get quotes back, let alone getting product in the door. We should have triggers in our mind to say, hey, I need to have ways to lift this load more efficiently.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you said that, the triggers, because I just wanted to show you everyone an example of just a way you can communicate with your suppliers. You could set up reminders, and notice right here, you could say, all right, Mr. Supplier, this is something, or Mrs. Supplier, these requirements are due in the next 30 days. However, you're late on sending me these suppliers, these requirements. So you can have the ability to automate reminders and improve your communication with the supplier. And the reason why that's important is because now you can repurpose your tasks to do something else. Because here we could say, on the first of the month, I want to send out to my 10 suppliers, my 100 suppliers, my 1,000 suppliers, all the requirements they owe me, or the requirements that are scheduled to be due to me in the next 30 days. So once again, it's just a way to communicate, because coming back to the beginning, the 5 steps, we first need to see them, then we rank and measure them, rank and score them with the criteria, then we have to communicate with them. So as we continue on this particular process, another way we can communicate, and customers have communicated, is with a portal. Brandon mentioned sometimes his buyers are earning or working an extra 5 hours a week in overtime. But imagine if there was a way to communicate with your suppliers digitally, meaning not emails. They can log in, and now they could see their requirements. They could see what you need them to upload or forms they need them to fill out. During the COVID, this portal concept became very important, because now it's a focused view of communication between you and your suppliers. So now your suppliers can respond, oh, Brandon needs this particular allergen certificate. He needs this particular document. He needs me to sign electronically this NDA. So therefore, a portal, automated reminders, these are just tools to eliminate pain of trying to manage and communicate with your suppliers. Do you think these tools would have helped you, Brandon?
Yeah, I think you just hit a big button, right? And that's automation. And that's one of the ways to efficiently add these layers and expand that reach. If you have tools that can automate even just the communication, right? Like, I got the supplier's approval packet. I've approved everything. Green light today, June 30th, they are approved in our system. If you can have a system that's automated to say, on June 29th, 2022, you have to review and get this packet back, and that system will automatically email that person or notify that supplier, like, hey, you've got to have all this stuff back in by June 29th, 2022. Like now you don't have a person that's sending out emails all day, every day, or has these multiple calendars trying to track all the stuff that they've got to follow up on, besides just cutting POs and getting quotes in and right, like talking to vendors. So I think automation is a big way to lighten that load and that lift.
No, I appreciate that, because you know what, that moves us into our fourth step in this journey on this particular 5 steps of ensuring better quality from your suppliers, and that's risk models. And a lot of times people say, well, what's the difference between risk and scoring? I think there's a lot of significant difference between the risks and the scoring of a supplier. So let's think about the pain. The pain aspect of your supplier may be a low impact supplier versus a high impact supplier, or this is when it comes up. First one is we want to see the likelihood of a risk of something happening. I deal with a lot of international customers, and maybe the supplier is great in sending me what I want when I want it, but there's always an element of customs risk. There's a risk because this particular supplier has to deal with customs, whereas my other 4 suppliers do not. Also, I may have a risk of the size. This one supplier has to send me 5 batches because my order size is so large, but this other supplier only sends me 1, but I have to order it from China. So there's a lot of international risks, compliance risks, transportation risks, and really this is something that you can measure the likelihood of an event happening, high level, low level, and you can rank it on you can set up your criteria based upon various thresholds. Did you have a risk model at your facility, Brandon, when you had your facility, your flower plant?
I had a pucker factor. I knew when I was getting nervous. You know, we were really small, and I'm guilty of a lot of the things that I'm of not doing the things I'm saying we should do. Right, I learned through a lot of pain, and we ended up with a lot of programs and systems because like starting out it was like, hey, let's go buy some wheat and let's turn it into flour. That sounds really simple and really straightforward. And then you know, like you start to learn what you don't know. But we started to have, I mean, even just on the inventory side, right, like hey, when we get down to this much grain of a specific type in a silo or bin, it's time to make an order, right? Rather than like, oh man, we're out of pastry flour, we're out of soft white wheat. So and that started to grow into, okay, now we kind of got operations under control. How do we get more control? Because there was one time we thought we bought an organic wheat, and that's what we purchased, and then a week after it was in our bins, we found out that it wasn't organic. And there's a lot of stuff around maintaining an organic program. So it was a big impact to us. And at that point, you know, we looked at each other and we're like, we've really got to get better control around when things aren't happening or good, right? It would have been great for us to know that the rye suppliers in the area were drying up before it was time for us to order, right? We had no triggers, we had no alerts. So we ended up with a lot more than what we started with, but we were by no means a really advanced system like we're talking about here. So I felt firsthand the pain of not having those thresholds or triggers and alerts.
I was on mute, but tell me this one, Brandon. Is it possible to have a high risk supplier with a high score? Maybe my supplier scores high, but they're a low risk, or they score high and they have a high risk. Can you think of any examples like that?
Yeah, you bet. So I would imagine that some of our folks, like let's say we have a cafeteria, that has nothing to do with your business, but you still have purchasing agents, you still have to have approved suppliers. And let's say you're buying salt for the cafeteria. It doesn't go into your product, but you got to have an approved salt vendor. They have very low impact or risk to your business. So their risk level is really, really, really low, but they might be awesome. They always deliver exactly what you want on time. they have great pricing, whatever your criteria is. So they have a great score in terms of a supplier, but they have absolutely no impact to your business. So having a great score with low risk, I don't need to pay attention to that. I don't want my folks paying attention to that. There may also be suppliers that don't have great scores because they deliver late or they don't have their certifications or whatever, and they're a super high risk to your business. They're a critical component, or they're a very expensive component that's hard to source in other places. Maybe they're a sole supplier. There's a lot of risk associated with that. Now, they could be great and deliver on time and do all that and have a great score and have high risk, but they could also have high risk and low score. And that's where you want to really pay attention, is have those alerts and triggers set up. That's where you want your folks and teams paying attention, is those high risk, low scores, or just high risk folks, right? You can start to rank and prioritize where to pay attention.
No, this is a great spot for Aaron to do another poll, because I like your cafeteria example, because those are suppliers, but once again, they have zero impact on the business, but they do have a score. So Aaron?
Yeah, it's my turn again right now. So I just asked the poll question. So we're going to launch this again really quick in an effort to help everyone understand where we're at against the other folks in this virtual room. So on your screen now, please start voting. It's really interesting. I've got a question that turns it on its head. Now, in this risk model, we're talking about making the model for the supplier. But Brandon, your example made me think, do you want to create the models based on the core ingredients that you need, right? Is that a way to look at that? And so let's say salt isn't in the cafeteria. It's actually you need a artisan, sea salt from wherever to make your specific batch. If you only have that one place that can provide that, are you looking at the risk model for the supplier or the ingredient itself? Is there a difference to that?
Yeah, that's a really good distinction and a good point, Aaron. So I think it's important to, when we're doing that risk assessment and building our risk models and then applying those models to our suppliers, we really need to look at that, I believe, in two categories. One is on the products. So we look at all of our components or ingredients that are going into our products, and we rank and score those. And then we also look at the suppliers, because you'll probably have multiple suppliers for the same ingredient. So you want to know who's the best and who's the not best. And then you'll also have ingredients that are way more priority to pay attention to than ingredients that don't matter. So I think it's important to look at both discreetly, but then as you're scoring, you can start to add those together, right? And Kevin made an interesting point, the difference between risk and scoring. I think you can use scoring to help assess your risk, but it's still its own thing, right? Scoring is based on their performance, and it's factual, right? You delivered on time, you have your criteria met, you're doing what we've agreed that you will do. The risk is based around how that could impact your business, and then how that performance relates to the impact to your business, right? So two distinct features that I think marry up at the end of the day, and again, to your point, Aaron, should be looked at in both areas, the products and the suppliers.
Yeah. Well, listen, we've got, kind of a split here, guys, on the supplier risk model. I think this gives us an indication. A good portion of our audience today is going to take home this idea of building this risk model using the information you guys gave, right? So that's fantastic. Moving on, we are seeing some questions come in, and I want to get to those. And you guys on the line, you guys are fantastic. I love these questions, so stay tuned. But we want to talk a little bit more about that risk model, right?
Yeah. So, and this is kind of where you were going with that question, Aaron. When you have that criteria, right? And if you don't have a risk model, it can be really simple. I mean, it's really just one of the easiest ways to do it is to have a matrix, and on the left side, it's frequency or impact. And on the top, you've got like likelihood to occur. So you've got impact and likelihood. And then you could go low, medium, high on the top and low, medium, high on the side. And then you just put a product in there. And the criteria might be a little bit harder to come to, right? The subjective criteria to say, well, what makes something high risk or low risk? But I would bet that if we asked every person on the call, what are your most critical components? They're going to be able to rattle them off like bam, 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 bam. Okay, well, they'll intuitively know what's a high risk and what's a low risk. What's the thing that makes your purchasing agents the most worried? What are you tracking in terms of SPC? Like, what are your yield numbers? What are you always making sure you have? Do you always have salt? Is it always online? That model, right, and applying it here, it really starts to give you focus. When you're able to see what are our high risk items and who are the high risk suppliers, you can now focus that effort and get the team moving in the right direction with those other tools, right? With that visibility and with the ratings and the scorecards, and then automating that communication. And now you have risk to see where you should be applying that leverage.
No, that's good, Brandon. And here it's just once again just an example of how you can rank your high and low risk items, suppliers, and items. So here you can see here it's my high risk suppliers, but here are my high risk items. So you have a way to compare and contrast those particular suppliers from a top to bottom from a risk perspective, which means what is my likelihood of having problems if I'm dealing with the high risk problems, suppliers, versus my likelihood of not having the ingredients or the materials that I need. So that's just a different way of looking at it. And here's another way, once again, just giving you as an idea that you have the ability to look at the risk from an audit perspective, a risk chart, high, low, and then you can define your risk management matrix. What I mean by a matrix is regulatory. Brandon mentioned the FDA. Maybe I have regulatory risk. Maybe I have international risk dealing with customs. Maybe all of my suppliers are remote. I have transportation risk. So you could set up something holistically and now manage your supplier network, your suppliers through a comprehensive, thought out strategic risk model. Last but not least, the last step. It's important that if you have problems with your suppliers, how do we communicate that to your suppliers to make sure that we could set up corrective actions? How do we identify their trends of not really sending us what we asked for? They're deviating from our particular specifications. We receive so many non-conformances and deviations on time, on quantity, on quality, that what I want to do is I want to set up corrective actions so I can manage these particular SCARs, supplier CAPAs, with my suppliers. Here's just an example of a screen that shows you how when you manage your suppliers, maybe you want to evaluate them, gather the data, collect the information, and then share with them, this is the findings I have. What can we do as a partnership to make sure that you can correct these problems we have together? Maybe are we not expressing that we need it at this particular hour? Think of it. It's possible you need to get it on the 15th, but I need it at 6 a.m. when my line starts, not at noon on the 15th. Certain things like that, that's really important. And the supplier corrective action is a mechanism for you to track, manage the problems within your suppliers in order to get to resolution. Brandon and I'm gonna let Brandon say the final words, but we were really excited that you took the time to listen to us talk about the 5 steps to ensuring better quality from your suppliers. And Brandon and I leverage, it's hard to believe we got 50 years between us. I guess 25, 35, that's 55. Wow, Brandon, we're dated. So when you look at it like that, we looked at these top 5 bullets as the ones that probably would resonate most with the audience, meaning how do you get your supplier visibility? How do I rank and score them? How do I communicate? How do I define a risk? And then how do I manage all of the corrective actions and supplier scars that we have between our partners? Brandon, do you have any final words before we turn it over to Aaron?
You know, as I look back to the topic of what we're trying to communicate here, right? And that's how to get better quality from your suppliers. With any process or any situation we're in life, if we don't identify where we're falling short, if we don't know how we're failing or how we're not getting to where we want to get, then we probably can't make improvements. We might do things, but we can't mistake that activity for achievement, right? So being able to take a really systematic approach to say, okay, I want our supplier quality to improve. Here's the areas where we're not getting where I want us to be or where we need to be compliant. And here are the steps we're going to take to get from A to B, right? That old analogy of the map. If you throw a map at somebody and say, hey, I want you to get to here, one of the most important things to know is where you're at right now. And with the 5 steps we've talked about here, right? Extending that supplier network visibility, getting rating and scorecard so you have some focus, automating the system so that you can handle more, building the supplier risk so you know, again, where to focus and where to apply leverage, and then tracking to see with those supplier corrective actions that they're getting performance. I think that's important.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And here's a couple of things. So guys, I really appreciate this. This is, first of all, a lot of the questions are, hey, what, where are we going to get the slides? Yes, just ask and we'll get those to you guys. Thank you so much. I have to do this, Brandon and Kevin, because Yvette at the very top of the hour, she said, hello from Chicago. And so Yvette, hello from Novato, Idaho, and Tampa Bay. That's where we're all residing. Got a bunch of questions here. A couple, actually, guys, did some comments. I love this because people aren't just asking questions; they're saying, "Hey, how they're doing it." So I've got a really engaged crowd. One of the things I wanted to mention really quick, we didn't put it into the presentation, but I did want to just kind of challenge everyone's assumptions on what a risk is and how to start looking at environmental risks outside of anyone's control. I'm going to bring our attention to that little storm that happened in Texas earlier this year, that things froze. That had a major impact on supply chains across this country that took a month to shake out, right? You should absolutely be thinking forward into, what are the environmental impacts that might cause disruptions from your suppliers. Okay, another example is like rolling blackouts, right? So can you send your supplier channel a requirement that says, or a question even that says, do you have a mitigation plan for if your power gets shut off? Right? Things like that can have a big impact on your ability to get things out the door and processed in time to your customers. Be thinking about it and ask your suppliers to work with you on these things. I think they'll continue. My personal opinion is that these kinds of issues are going to continue to grow and you should start to plan for them. So think about those geo-specific supplier requirements about energy, okay? Certified, do they have a plan in place to mitigate any effects? Secondly, we do have somebody that says an interesting tactic they use to help keep sort of this transparency between all of their suppliers without being, overtly, hey, this supplier, that supplier. They anonymize, because they anonymize their suppliers sort of score and then share the performance across their suppliers in a ranked format, so that if you've got that classic B supplier that just doesn't do anything that you want them to get to that A status, let them know. Like, you're not going to get as much business because you're sitting down here in the middle of the stack. So I thought that was a kind of an interesting point to make. So I appreciate that. We do have a question from Razi. So how do you deal with a high volume supplier who is not performing up to standard?
That is a really good question. I'll throw that one and see if Kevin has any thoughts. But if they're a sole supplier, right? If they're the only ones that can really meet that high volume, I think there's a couple different approaches. One, which I think is becoming more and more common, is that companies are moving up and down the supply chain to help control that. So you'll see acquisitions, and I know that's not always possibility or even on the table, right? But if you have a relationship with them and if they're responsive and you're able to have dialogue, what I would try to do is express the impact that they have. And they may know, I mean, if they're a high volume supplier, if you're a small fish in their pond, but it's still high volume for you, you may not feel like you have much leverage. The laundry list that I would look at is to say, look to qualify other suppliers so that you have leverage and you're not stuck with them if they're not performing. Try to negotiate ways to financially incent them to perform, right? Like if we have 100% on-time delivery, they get a higher price, and if they're late, they get penalized, and they have to, like you get to pay less. There's incentives that may go beyond just, hey, like if you want my business, you get to deal with my service. If you're stuck with that vendor, see if you can negotiate ways, because I'm sure they want more money. You may not be able to get less, but if you offer incentives to make you seem like a bigger fish, that might help.
I like that answer, and I was thinking sometimes the supplier doesn't know that they're bad. So when you have the objective evidence that shows, look, you are really terrible, and these are the reasons why, and I have the detail, the data to transparently show them why they're bad, then they could try to improve. And that's where that supplier SCAR process comes in, because you're presenting them with the data that can help them make some conscious decisions. And if they don't improve, as long as, if like Brandon suggested, I would agree with all that stuff as well.
Yeah, good. All right, thanks. James has a bunch of good questions. I'm going to go with the one he did offer, similar to what I was talking about earlier. James says, my scorecards are sent to suppliers along with their score is the score of their direct competitor. So James is taking a step further. He's letting that market space really kind of outperform each other, if you will, to make his job easier. Very smart, James. James also has a question, and I thought this might come up because this is kind of integral to some of our operations. James asks, is the software Part 11 compliant? So CFR Part 11A, I think, is the full breadth there. And
our software, hello, how you doing? Our software, I'm sorry, our software is CFR Part 11 compliant for USDA standards. So that's a different criteria than, say, the life sciences. Also, when you look at it from, so yeah, that's it. We have USDA falls under some of the CF 21 Part 11 standards, and we could support that part of it. But if it's pharmaceutical, life sciences, that's yet to come.
Yep, yeah, and that's a big distinction because James does say biotech immunotherapy, so that's a good distinction to draw. Thanks, appreciate that, Kevin. Julie asks, do you offer any or other courses related to or about supplier management? We don't have any coursework, Julie. These are the ways that we do kind of try and help the whole market space sort of deal with some of these things. But we'd love to just have a chat with you if there's any specific interest that you have in learning a little bit more. It might just be worth time taking a personal conversation with one of the solutions architects with us today. So Julie, stay tuned. We'll get in touch with you if you have any more questions about that. And I'm going to end this up on one note, Brandon and Kevin. So we have a very large, very well-known produce provider here in the US, very well-known, only the finest berries. Now, they're taking this supplier piece to, I think, the stratosphere. They have developed a pay for performance, for quality performance program that is using Safety Chain, right? This is something so advanced. We'd love to have anybody, if anybody's in that space, we'd love to talk to you a little bit more. We don't want to talk, take up your time today to talk about it, but personally, we'd love to give you that case study. They're able to work very, very closely with their producers, and that's the key here. They work so closely with their producers, and they enable them to make only the finest berries. It's absolutely fantastic. We'd love to give anybody else some more information about that if you're interested. But for right now, we do want to wrap up. Our time is a little bit past. You can get more resources at safetychain.com. Up next week, we're going to be talking with Fresca, Mexican food. So these guys make 5 million tortillas a day, and they're actually growing. We're going to be discussing with their VP how they integrated quality and production systems. So if you're not signed up for that and you're interested, go over to safetychain.com. Check it out. Brandon and Kevin, fantastic. Thank you so much for donating your time and wisdom to us. Always a pleasure to have you guys on board Beyond Compliance.
Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. This was a blast.
All right, guys, that'll end it for today. Thank you again for joining us, and we'll sign off for now. Have a great holiday weekend coming up this weekend, and stay safe out there. Cheers.